Welcome to this event, the release of the second quarter Business and Consumer Confidence Indices. My name is Andre Gooden. I am a director of the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce, and I'm chairman of the Jamaica Conference Board. And we're happy that you have joined us through whatever medium today. We are looking forward to a very good program, as usual. The last quarter brought us sort of a mixed bag in terms of results. There was really not really a trend to be detected. What I do recall is the issues relating to management of the economy, management of crime and violence, and management of the COVID pandemic were some of the concerns among businesses and consumers. We anxiously await our main presenter, Mr. Don Anderson, who will share the results for the second quarter. Well, thank you very much to our sponsors, National Commercial Bank, NCB Capital Markets Limited, and also we have with us the very exciting, one of my favorite entrepreneurs, Honorable Thalia Lynn, CEO of Island Grill, who will be joining us in the panel section, and equally impressive, Managing Director of Chassis Ramson Limited, my friend Philip Ramson, who incidentally is also a Vice President of the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce. So the run of events effectively will be the sponsors will share a few insights with us. Then Mr. Anderson will present. We will share with you two short tips that we have. We did our own little vox pop to determine what is happening on the ground in terms of consumers and business. Thereafter, we will have a discussion among the panel, and we will then be properly equipped to continue to manage our way successfully through these difficult times. So without further ado, our first presenter representing National Commercial Bank is Mr. Dane Nicholson, Manager of Special Investigation and NCB's Fraud Prevention Unit, who will do a short presentation to us. Morning, Dane. Thank you for joining us.
Morning, Stephen. Thanks for having me. So, good morning all, and welcome again. I'll be doing a brief presentation this morning on cybersecurity best practices and how businesses, no matter the type of business, whether it be SME, large, medium, or corporation, as to some of the things that companies should look out for. And despite the challenging times that we face now as it relates to the impact of COVID-19 on businesses and the inflationary effect that it might be having on the organization, it is extremely important for us to not cut in the wrong places. And cybersecurity is one of those places that we should ensure that we invest heavily in. So the digital shift in conducting business transaction has created a new paradigm, which has not only affected customers, but business as well, because it has created opportunities for companies to reach a wide cross-section of their customer base. But comes with that is also the increased risk and the speed at which cybersecurity incidents do occur. And as a consequence, it has become necessary for business to make the right investment in implementing effective cybersecurity control, because it is very important for us to note that it is easier for us to prevent cybersecurity than to try and recover from a cybersecurity incident. So despite it is quite expensive, some businesses might say, to invest in cybersecurity, it is a lot cheaper for us to prevent it than to investigate or recover from a cybersecurity incident. So I would say that I would encourage and urge businesses not to cut their cybersecurity budget, especially given the significant increase in the digital footprint across the different channels. And it is also equally important for businesses to know, just as how we invest in physical security, where you invest in grills, you invest in static security guards to protect your cash, it is even more important for companies to invest in cybersecurity because there's a greater threat in the cyberspace than in the physical space. But a lot of persons aren't necessarily making the connection between cybersecurity and their profit because you work extremely hard to build up your profit. Do not allow for cyber criminals to just come and take it away just like that. So there are a few important cybersecurity points that I want to ensure that businesses are aware of. Ensure that they invest in cyber threat detection system. Ensure that there's a plan in place to detect cybersecurity, and ensure that there's a cybersecurity prioritization. There's a hierarchy. You invest in cybersecurity training for your staff, for the directors, and employees as well, because employees are one of the weakest link in the cybersecurity, because you can invest heavily and as the best cybersecurity architecture, and then the people within the space is what let us know. So there are some critical cybersecurity threats out there, ransomware, and this can cripple an organization as to how it operates, because this is a type of malware designed to prevent users or organization from accessing files on their network or computer. And persons have the notion to say that if you aren't in technology or you aren't a financial institution, you are not necessarily have to invest in cybersecurity. That is not true. Once you have a computer, once you have internet banking, it is important for companies to invest heavily in cybersecurity and also to train their employees to be aware of cybersecurity to minimize social engineering and phishing attacks. And phishing attack as well. And over the last couple of days, we have seen a significant increase in malware, which targets particularly small and medium-sized enterprises, which leads to a lot of business email compromise. And also the losses associated with those is quite heavily. Over the last couple of days, I've seen small businesses lose in excess of $20 million just because of malware injected on their computer device, and they did not invest heavily in cybersecurity to prevent or detect the cyber threat. So please ensure that we have a robust cybersecurity architecture in place to detect malware. And malware are keystroke logger. It captures your password, username, everything that you types on the computer. So it is extremely important for businesses to invest heavily in cybersecurity. Also, account protection and the card security best practices is extremely important as well for businesses, especially small business from time to time who do not have multiple employees who can have separation of duty. You find that password and username are shared between multiple persons. I would encourage businesses not to do so. Use unique login credentials for each account. Frequently review account balances and transaction details, and immediately report suspicious transaction. Create strong password with combination of lower and upper cases. Change the password quite frequently as well. And this is absolutely important. Use multi-factor authentication provided by financial institution. For example, biometric or secure token. Minimize and avoid using automatic login feature. Do not use account numbers or other personal identifiable information when creating internet banking, and avoid using online or mobile banking when connected to public or free Wi-Fi. And also for businesses, please ensure that you activate transaction alert so that you can monitor your account. You'll get emails and text messages when transaction takes place on either the business credit card or the online banking profile. And also ensure that you keep software application and operating system and browsers up to date, because what this does, it minimizes the risk of a cyber actor getting access to your information. And also do not run free antivirus and anti-malware software. Ensure that you have the paid version, because there are some gaps in the free one that cyber criminals will exploit. And also ensure that you implement no-click, no-link policies, because what that does, it minimizes the possibility of you falling victim to a cyber attack. And what it also does, please ensure that you educate your employees to do not open suspicious emails if they aren't sure about the email, because that is one of the ways that fraudsters are penetrating, particularly small businesses with the malware. They'll send them emails with attachment. I saw just recently where a small business got an email to complete a survey, and fraudsters tricked them into completing the survey to say that if the first employee who complete the survey win a prize of $10,000, it end up costing that small business $10 million because of responding to that email. And in general, what I want to advise businesses to do, I know that we are going through challenging times and we are cutting our budget, but please do not cut the cybersecurity budget, because it is extremely difficult to investigate and to recover from a cyber threat. It is much cheaper and easier to prevent cybersecurity. So ensure that we invest heavily in cybersecurity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dean. Very clear presentation. Thank you for the advice and the instruction as well. Very key. As we move more into the digital space, we have to do so with caution, observing all the requisite security protocols. Just to say that questions and comments, audience, will be facilitated via the chat room at the end of the presentations and during the panel discussion. You can just type your questions in the Q&A section of the chat. You can either direct your question to a specific panel member, or any one of them will be happy to provide clarity. Thank you very much again, Dean. We'll now like to ask from NCB Capital Markets, Ms. Anya Walker, Vice President, Strategy, Research, Innovation, and Projects, to commence her presentation. Good morning, Anya.
Good morning, Andre. Thank you for having me. So this morning, my presentation will explore inflation and just kind of set the tone for the release that is to come later. And I will examine, the sources of inflation. But it's interesting, just to tie back to Dane's presentation, I saw an article recently from Microsoft CEO that spoke to the fact that digitization is actually the key to deflation, because it allows companies to reduce their costs and to help them to combat the current inflationary environment, which is expected to persist for a while. And so it ties in nicely without, directly so, but it does tie in with, the move towards, inflation and how businesses can try to combat that, because the technology overall will allow you to be more efficient. So in terms of my presentation, as I said before, I will look at, explore the topic a little bit, look at what has been the sources of inflation, the outlook of inflation, and the impact that has had, just generally on the capital markets and businesses in general. So let me jump into it. I gave you the overview already. And so what we're seeing now in terms of inflation is that if you look at both graphs, this shows, the one on the left shows inflation, CPI, consumer prices for the UK and Canada and the US. The one on the right shows the CPI and PPI for Jamaica. And what you can see is that this time inflation is a global phenomenon. It's not just localized to any particular market, but countries across the world are experiencing it. And why is that? Because of the where it's coming from. Inflation is cost push. What we saw coming out of the pandemic, that unexpected shutdown that happened, shut down a lot of businesses, and then the restart, it really caused a sudden increase in demand and supply chain challenges, because once you've shut down ports and all of that, and the shortage of workers caused by the pandemic and so on, what you have happen was that, it created supply chain challenges as well. So the combination of demand and supply chain challenges began to actually push inflation or consumer prices as well as producer prices up in 2021. And the problem actually emerged faster in emerging markets. And we saw where even early in 2021, like mid 2021, central banks in Latin America had actually started to increase rates. And so generally, we came into 2022 now, and things are compounded by the Russian-Ukraine conflict, right? We see where, the conflict, Russia and the Ukraine are key exporters of several major commodities, right? Oil and wheat being chief among them. Russia accounts about 10% of the world's oil, Ukraine 20% of the world's wheat. So that impact on, supply pushed up prices. Adding to that, we have drought conditions in several food producing areas that are impacting, supplies of food items. And so what we're seeing is that inflation in Jamaica is at a high that we have not seen in a while. In the UK, inflation is at its highest in 40 years, same for the US. And inflation Canada is also high, the highest it has been since January 1983. So takeaway here is that inflation is not localized to Jamaica. It's actually very much a global phenomenon, and it's being driven by just cost factors for key commodities, right? As well as supply chain challenges. Now, what has been the drivers of inflation? Energy prices has been a big one, right? So with the surge in demand when the global economy resumed, the blessings of the COVID-19 vaccine that allowed countries to reopen their economy, that sudden sharp increase in demand started to push energy prices up. And then conflict in Russia complicates that, as I had said before. But interestingly enough, an unexpected impact that energy also has is through food prices, because of food, you wouldn't expect it, but a lot of the food that we import, take wheat, for example, energy prices feed into agricultural prices. When you take a country like the US and the major global producers of those major crops like wheat, it's highly mechanized, right? So energy prices feed through just the cost to run these equipment because they run on fuel. It feeds through the impact on transportation of these goods to the end users. And then in an unexpected way is through fertilizer prices, because petrochemicals are a key component of fertilizer. So you have that whole cycle. It's like a vicious cycle where energy prices are feeded into food prices. And also at the same time, food prices are also being driven up by drought conditions, right? So 80% of the Western US is actually experiencing extreme drought conditions and have been doing so for the last year. 15% of Europe is now facing drought. And, all of this, what that has done is has impacted prices for a range of commodities, including oats, wheat, soybean, coffee, and even livestock. Saw an article recently that we're saying that farmers were having to sell off their livestock in the US because between the cost, the inflation pressures, and the drought conditions, they just couldn't afford to be in farming anymore. And so, unexpectedly, we have these confluence of negative factors that are driving up prices for consumers. So what we end up with is that we see that food price inflation is rising, right? And supply chain challenges are also adding to the pressures on, overall. The cost of shipping has gone up significantly because of the disruption in global supply chains. So again, as I would have pointed out, the pressures, the combination of all of these factors is that we now have a situation where prices are at a historic high across the globe. Not necessarily anything that is happening in Jamaica. And one of the trick about, the drought conditions is historically, drought was primarily centralized in, Africa. You'd hear about drought in Africa a lot more, but now you're having droughts all over the place, and it is impacting all over the world, and it's impacting food production in various markets and the cost at which we're able to purchase that. So what has been the impact of inflation on the local, I would say, businesses and the capital markets? So to combat inflation, BOJ, like central banks in Latin America, and later, probably that took a while in the developed markets because they did not start increasing rates until around December last year. The BOJ has increased rates by a total of 500 basis points. That's 7 consecutive rate hikes to 5.5%. And what the inflationary environment is actually doing is that we're seeing that after a period of protracted low interest rates and solid growth in the economy barring the COVID-19 period, we're seeing where that long period of low interest rate, loose liquidity is coming to an end. And so money market conditions have tightened and money market interest rates have gone up. I mean, we have not seen these level of interest rates in Jamaica for a while. What that has now started to do too is to filter over into commercial bank loan rates. And the banks took a while to adjust rates, but they have started to do so. And rates have increased by an average 1.8% as of May, when you look at it year over year. And what we're also seeing too is that, the cost for producers, especially those in manufacturing and mining, as measured by the PPI, we're seeing where those costs for the companies have gone up significantly. And we see more listed companies basically reporting, higher costs for imported goods, and it's starting to impact their margins. Now, some companies have been able to invest in technology and so on to reduce their overall costs and just be more leaner and more efficient. But the reality is that inflation is having an impact on businesses. For consumers, it has meant a sharp disruption in their disposable incomes, and it's not limited to Jamaica. I was watching the news last night and we saw where people we're turning more and more to food banks in the US to meet their needs because inflation is so high. And, for a country that typically has inflation in the range of 2 to 3% or even less than that, the price increases are usually so negligible, but that situation has changed and persons are feeling the pinch and feeling it more, right? Because normally when prices rise, it all depends. What is happening now is that it's being felt in areas that impact consumer more. It's being impacted in terms of energy, whether it's fuel, whether it's electricity, and it's impacting consumers in terms of the food. Day to day, it's in their faces. What might that mean for the capital markets? It means that higher costs for debt financing overall, with a 500 percentage points increase in the central bank policy rates. What you're now seeing is that it's gonna filter over almost immediately the money market, the bond market, and the higher interest rate environment is also impacting sentiment. And that impact on sentiment is not unique to Jamaica. Later in the slide, in the last slide, I will explore how it's impacting sentiment in other countries as well as Jamaica. Now, my second to last slide now, what is the outlook for inflation? Where from here? Based on the World Bank, and I look at the three variables that I explored earlier, based on information from the forecast from the World Bank, is that energy prices are expected to increase an average of 50% in 2022. We've seen much of that increase already. According to the IEA, the outlook for 2023 suggests that conditions could remain tight. They're not expecting any significant increase in supplies, nor are they experiencing any major reduction in demand. And so, barring some kind of supply shock, we're likely to see, a pace, unlikely to see any sharp increases for the rest of 2022. And going into 2023, however, the wild card in 2023 is what is likely to happen in terms of global growth, because that could flip the picture a bit for energy prices, right? Climate change now, that is the major driver of drought conditions. Again, that's another wild card in inflation outlook. There is nothing that you can do that can predict that. There's so much happening with climate change. There was an article earlier this week that spoke to, for 3 days in Greenland, there was record high temperatures, and it melted the ice caps in Greenland, the ice sheets, sorry. And what happened in that case is that 18 billion gallons of water went into the oceans over those 3 days. So there's a lot happening with climate change that we don't have any control over right now, because those actions that are affecting us now are things that would have done in the past. All we can do is improve going forward, and those benefits will not come in immediately. In terms of food pricing, what we're seing is that prices are easing a little bit, and would see that in terms of the producer prices. For May and June, we saw where prices, as measured by the UN Food and Agricultural Organization, they have an index that tracks prices, and it was down 2.3% in May, and it was the third consecutive monthly decline. However, it is still over 20% above where it was a year ago. Food prices are expected to moderate in 2023, according to the US Department of Agriculture. However, it's more likely to be just above its historical target range at 2.5 to 3.5%. And one of the things that we need to remember is that inflation is about the rate of change in prices, right? And even though the rate will slow down for consumers, that don't mean much because their income is not necessarily keeping pace. And it just means that they will continue to face higher prices overall. So yes, the rate of increase is likely to slow, but consumers are just going to be facing higher prices overall. And that's going to pressure disposable incomes until salary increases catch up with that, or until prices come down. Locally, we see where the DBJ, we're trying to mitigate the impact now. You know, food security has become a concern for a lot of countries, and they're investing, you know, in terms of increasing food supply. Since May, we have also seen where global supply chain pressures have been easing somewhat, as measured by the index that they use to track key variables in the global supply chain. It's expected to ease in 2023, but those prices, the cost and so on in global supply chain are not expected to come back down, just because there are infrastructural challenges facing global supply chains. They need to build more ports, invest in technology and so on. And that's going to take some time. And then key to it too is that workforce shortages persist in the global supply chain. I was reading another article where it pointed to the need for some 180 or 90,000 truck drivers in the US just to move goods. And that deficit in the labor market will persist. Of course, new surges in COVID-19 infections and monkeypox, you know, those are downside risks. So on the whole, and in line with the BOJ forecast, we expect, you know, consumer prices, the pressures to ease somewhat, but, you know, prices are still expected to be elevated, and inflation is still expected to be higher than it has been historically. Now, in terms of my last slide, what I want you to take away is that it would appear that, you know, if you were to draw some conclusion around the correlation between stock market, is that, you know, the inflationary environment, the high interest rate environment is beginning to impact the stock market. We're seeing where the market is down year to date after making some gains early in the year. You know, when we looked at it, there was a positive correlation, but it was not statistically significant, not high enough. But what we're seeing though is that this impact that inflation is having on consumer confidence is not unique to Jamaica. When prices are rising at this pace and, you know, your disposable incomes are not keeping pace, there's uncertainty around what the future holds. It is going to impact confidence. Consumer confidence is down 23% in June in the US. Business confidence is down 15%. And as a matter of fact, in the UK, confidence is at a 41-year low. So generally, you know, inflation is beginning to impact confidence. And I'm sure Don will speak to, you know, what is happening to consumer confidence in Jamaica. All right. Thank you very much. Hopefully we set the tone for what is to come.
Thank you. Thank you, Anya. Remember to stop share. Wow. The consumer confidence in Great Britain is down how much? 15%?
41-year low, yes.
41-year low. Wow. Don, I'll ask you for a comment on that later. But thank you for that, Anya. Excellent summary there. And would be interesting in hearing what our panelists have to say in short order about the cost of borrowing now and the impact of, you know, inflation on their margins, and of course food prices, how they're managing the food prices to keep us all happy. But thank you very much, Anya. Excellent, excellent as usual. And without further ado, I will invite Managing Director, Executive Chairman, beg your pardon, Market Research Services Limited, Mr. Don Anderson, to share with us the second quarter business and consumer confidence indices results. Morning again, Don.
Morning, Andre. Morning to all your presenters and your panelists and your audience. It is again a real pleasure for Market Research Services Limited to be making this presentation of the second quarter business and consumer confidence 2022. We're going to use the charts almost exclusively and then talk through them. So I'm going to start sharing screen right now. So we go to our report represented in our charts here. Just before I do that, let me just indicate for those who are maybe not familiar with the context. We interviewed a total of 600 persons across the island of Jamaica in a nationally representative sample. And we also interviewed 100 businesses across the industry profile. So the data that we're going to be presenting reflects the views of these two sets of people, two sets of entities. And we're going to go straight into it and talk through the charts because they do in fact speak very clearly to what is taking place. Let me just say right up front, we don't have exciting news. All right, except we looked at that chart that Anya just presented a while ago on the comparison between the US and ourselves. And it is interesting to note that we're trending in the same direction, if not the same proportions. But it's something that we need to note. We're part of a world process. And I think it's very important to note that. So let's go down. Let me.
You lost your share there, Don.
Yes, I did. Let me go start sharing again.
Okay.
My to my actual screenshots. Okay, here we go. All right. So we talk in terms of the results for the period April to June. This was the fieldwork date, April 12th to June 24th. And we gave you the background to the study in terms of who we spoke to. That's a fieldwork period. And of course, we exposed all the information to a very thorough validation check to ensure that we were reporting on data that we can put our next on the block, so to speak. So we talk first about consumer data. We like to talk about the consumers first, and then we get into the business indices. What is happening here is that consumer confidence overall is virtually unchanged. In the first quarter of 2022, consumer index was 157. That dropped really marginally to 156. You could say there's hardly any change. So we see the pattern from 2001 all the way through. We need to look perhaps at the last couple of quarters. And the key point here, consumer confidence is relatively unchanged between the first quarter of 2022 and the second quarter of 2022, dropping by 1 percentage point, actually less than 1 percentage point, 0.6. So we need to look a little bit beneath that. And we need to talk in terms of how the consumers feel about the current economic conditions first. And then we look at what are the expectations going forward. So they're reviewing what has taken place over the last 3 months. And what are they saying? They have a pretty good view of the current economic conditions. The index moved from 168 in the first quarter to 195 in quarter two. And we look at the first block of charts, current business, we can see that how this is actually represented is that the negatives fall. In the first quarter, 28.8% felt current business conditions were bad. That fell to 22.6% in the second quarter of 2022. And similarly, if we go all the way to the top, we see that in the first quarter, 12.2% felt that current business conditions were good. That moved up to 14.6%. And that is what fed into the index, the improvement in the index for this particular element, which is current business conditions, moving from 168 in first quarter to 195 in quarter two. What is the reason for this? What are the drivers? The principal driver for this is reflected in the chart to the right, is that the consumer perception is that jobs are less scarce. Notice we say less scarce because jobs have never been plentiful. But when we look at that particular data, in quarter one, 5% of the respondents said that jobs were plentiful, and that jumped to 12% in the second quarter of 2022. So that there is a reduction in the number of persons who felt that the jobs were in short supply. And this is what is driving this current business, the view of the consumers of current business conditions. But let us not get carried away. We moved from 5% to 12%. It has always been low. And therefore, this kind of jump, which seems like a quantum leap, is really at a pretty low level. And we need to reflect upon that. Let's not get carried away by the fact that, or the thought that consumers are now thinking that jobs are plentiful. We can see right to the top, 5.2% in first quarter felt that jobs are plentiful, 12.7% in the second quarter. So that's what's driving, or what drove this whole feeling from the consumer about current business, the current business climate. But what are the expectations? Going forward, consumers don't expect that this will prevail for long. Matter of fact, going forward in the next couple of months, consumers are saying we are less optimistic, which is what they're saying. When you look at the first block to the left, 24.4% in first quarter felt that business conditions would get worse. That number moved from 24.4% to 28.7%. And if we go to the top again, which is always the two variables we like to look at, in the first quarter, 42.7% of the consumers felt that business conditions would get better, but that number fell to 28.2% in the second quarter. So consumers are not overly optimistic. In fact, they're not optimistic that things are going to get better in the short run. What impact then is this likely to have on how they see themselves? And again, it is reflected when you look at the block to the right, that consumers really don't expect this. What they saw as a job surge from 5.2%, 12% in first quarter, between first quarter and second quarter. They don't expect that to continue. So they're beginning to think probably negatively, and we can see that reflected in the overall fall in the consumer index, consumer confidence index, from 157 down to 156. All right. So what impact is that likely to have on consumers? Again, consumers have never been really overly optimistic about changes in their household income, and they don't think it's going to happen coming over the next few months. And this definitely has impacted how they see themselves buying things or purchasing things or investing in anything. We can see on the chart to the right that basically this is unchanged. They don't see themselves having the kind of disposable income to be able to acquire homes or vehicles or vehicles. And in other words, there really is no change in how consumers view themselves and their own fortune over the next quarter. Income gains are not expected. Purchasing plans are therefore unchanged. And we see therefore that consumers are not in an optimistic mood, not in a buoyant mood. They are in fact beginning to reflect on pretty negative situations. We need to again look forward to the next quarter to see how that pans itself out. So it's important to look at the trend in consumer confidence over the 5 years. When you look at this, you can see that from a high of 180.2 in 2019, we dipped to an all-time low of 140 in 2021. That's COVID. where we begin to see a kind of improvement over the last year, because that picked up to 156.5, which is better than what 2020 was, where most of that year we were definitely conflicted with COVID. So we're beginning to see consumer confidence picking up again, but it is nowhere near that number pre-COVID 2019, which was 180. So in a nutshell, consumers are a bit wary about the conditions. They are bracing for more difficulties, a more difficult time ahead. What are the factors that they point to? The economy, they believe, is going to get tighter. More difficult business conditions will prevail. Less jobs are going to be available, and there are fewer economic gains that will actually help them to move out of their current discomfort zone. So unless there is a major positive interjection, consumer confidence is likely to show noticeable decline in the third quarter of 2022. We're saying the conditions are there for consumers to become even more negative, more pessimistic about their future. So we need to look very carefully at that. We have some general comments from consumers before we look at these two charts. What are the general things that consumers are talking about? One, they are very anxious about, as we can understand, recovery from COVID. It is still the number one issue. They're anxious for us to get out of this environment where we're actually tied down and, we're harnessed by COVID. So they're pretty anxious about seeing that. They're expressing a great concern about the price increases, understandably, because their disposable income is not changing by any stretch of imagination to keep pace with the changes in the price levels. And what is more, when we ask them about the future, the 12 months coming, 12 months ahead of them, 98% or thereabouts, close to everybody in the consumer panel said they expected, or they do expect prices will go up over the next 12 months. So we can see that they're not looking forward to a particularly positive future. They're in a difficult situation right now. They're grappling with serious price increases, and they expect that prices will go further up in the next 12 months. So we have two further charts that we want to look at before we get to the business segment. So there are a number of persons, 27%, and this tells you also more about how they see the economy over the next 12 months. 27% of all consumers that we interviewed said they expect conditions to get better. Not very optimistic, eh? So we asked them, well, what are the reasons why you feel this way? What are the drivers of this kind of sentiment that you're expressing that the conditions will get better? 27% of the persons that we interviewed. One, they don't really have a solid reason. They're just optimistic. Obviously, they want things to be better. And therefore, they're saying, I'm just being optimistic. That's the number one reason. They believe that the government is opening up the economy, and from that perspective, this fed into their notion that things will get better. Three, they see some growth in some sectors, such as tourism, agriculture, and the performing arts. So this, again, is part of the reason why they believe that business conditions are going to get better in the next 12 months. They've seen some growth in the economy, increase in sales in some entities in some quarters, and this is another driver of that sentiment that the economy is going to get better. And the fifth, government-related initiatives. They didn't speak specifically to which one, but they believe that government is doing some things to try to move the economy forward. And therefore, this 27% are optimistic that changes will take place for the better in the economy over the next 12 months. So to sum up the consumer confidence data that we just presented, consumer confidence hasn't really changed. They were fairly confident about the last 3 months in terms of the current business conditions, but going forward, consumers are pessimistic about what's going to happen to them over the next 12 months. So we wait to see what the third quarter really holds. 45%, significantly more than that 27%, believe the economy is going to get worse. This again is just consistent with what I've been saying. 45% said the economy is going to get worse. Well, what are the reasons? What are the drivers? One, not surprisingly, the most important factor that they cite, high prices. Impact of the war in Ukraine. High crime rate. It's not the businesses alone that are concerned about the high crime rate. Lack of employment, understandably, and nothing in place as far as they are concerned to affect any change. So this is the number 5 reason is probably the height of the pessimism. They're saying, I don't see anything happening that is likely to make a change in my fortunes. So again, high prices, the impact of the war, high crime rate, lack of employment, and understandably, nothing is in place to change what is happening to me at this point in time. So consumers aren't optimistic, and they have indicated this in no uncertain terms. The fact that the indices fell by only 1 percentage point is probably a reflection of the slow reaction of the other indices. But if this continues, unless there's some kind of interjection in the next couple of months, we anticipate that consumer confidence will fall in the next quarter. We wait to see. So, final chart on this particular segment, we asked consumers, how do they view what is happening in terms of their prices of goods? 89% of all persons said that prices increased significantly. 8% that it increased moderately. So for everybody that we interviewed virtually, they said, well, we have experienced significant increases in prices of goods that we buy normally. And this is obviously placing significant stress on individuals within the economy. Okay. We want to turn to the business confidence. What is happening here is that business confidence fell by 7.6 percentage points. Moved from 131 in the first quarter to 121. That reflects a 7.6 percentage fall in business confidence over the same period, second quarter compared to first quarter 2022. So the stability that we saw, perhaps stability between the fourth quarter of 2021 and the first quarter of 2022, we were hoping, well, it looks like things are beginning to now level off and we can see an upward movement. In the second quarter of 2022, that was not reflected. Business confidence fell by 7.6 percentage points from 131 index to 121. Very important to note that this is a situation as though businesses, and generally throughout, we will find that businesses are not particularly confident about moving forward, or they're not optimistic about moving forward, but they're pretty confident about their staying in the race and ensuring that they do in fact get out of this. So let's look at the same kinds of charts that we did in the consumer segment. What about current profits? We note that when we look at the left, the block, 41.6% in first quarter said that their profits were worse than expected. That fell to 29.8%. But if we look at the top level, the top tier, 19.1% expected better in the first quarter. That fell to 14% in the second quarter. So we can see that the optimism, the confidence is actually not as strong and actually falls quite significantly. It's interesting to note that when you look at the investment climate though, businesses are still saying, you know, despite what you're saying, it's a pretty decent time, a good time to invest. It's a kind of guarded kind of optimism, because when you look at the individual indices that in fact feed into overall indices, they don't really justify that comment, but businesses are there for the long term. And if there's a downturn in their own situation, they're not going to now preach doom and gloom. They're actually saying, yeah, we recognize that things are tight, things are rough, but we're going to dig out of the situation. And that's the sentiment that businesses have actually expressed generally, all right? So what are they thinking in terms of the economy? When we look at the chart to the extreme, the block to the extreme left. In first quarter of 2021, 15.7% said they expected the economy to get worse. That number moved up to 26.3% in the second quarter of 2022. And again, we're ignoring the blue blocks. We're looking up to the top again. In the first quarter of 2021, 65.2% of all businesses said, we believe the economy is going to get better. That fell to 45.6% in the second quarter. So there's a fair degree of negative thinking, if you wish, or maybe they're reflecting the reality of what is taking place. What about their firm's finances? Note, again, the same pattern, perhaps not to the same extent, but 7.9% in this first quarter of 2021 said, I expect my finances to get worse, 7.9%. When we get to the second quarter, we're actually seeing 10.5% saying the situation is going to get worse. And correspondingly, we see a 2% improvement in those who say it's going to get better, but it's obviously canceled by those who say it's going to get worse. So they're not overly optimistic about their firm's finances. What about profitability? Hardly any change here, except that 14.6% said yes, it's going to get worse in the first quarter, but that changed to 10.5%, which is a reduction. When you look at the top level, there's hardly any change. So there's really not a lot of movement here. Businesses are not feeling very positive about what's taking place, but they do believe that they have the capacity to dig out of what is taking place right now. So I want to look at the trend over the period. Now, we'll recognize immediately if we can flash our minds back to the consumer confidence and that 5-year trend, that which peaked, for example, at 118 in 2019. Business confidence has generally peaked at lower levels than the consumer. So the peak over the last 5 years, 2018 to now, is 141. Dropped to 139 in 2019. Dropped dramatically, understandably, COVID, to 120.5 in 2020. Picked up to 124.9 in 2021. And so far, we have seen just over 1 point, almost a 2 percentage point improvement in overall business confidence for 2022. Of course, this is first quarter and the second quarter combined, right? So business confidence tends to peak at a lower level. We can hope that that pattern that we see setting in from 2020 when COVID hit us, 2021 when it was probably maybe at its peak, and then where we're now seeing the economy opening up a bit, we're seeing the ravages of COVID not quite as bad, 126. So we can only hope that we can see that ladder going up, that step going up when we look at the next quarter, third quarter of 2022. So business confidence is marginally lower second quarter compared to first quarter. In general, there has been noticeable improvement in business confidence consistent with the time-honored position that businesses take longer to react to changes in the environment and do not show significant volatility. So businesses are long-term viewers. So when there's a particular shock in the economy, they take a while to adjust to that shock. It doesn't work the same way at the same pace with consumers. When there's a shock in the situation in the economy as far as consumers are concerned, the reaction tends to be more volatile. So we can see the more significant movement. Businesses tend to be more, I don't want to use the word blasé, but they tend to be very slow to react to changes in the economy around them because they're in there for the long haul and they think long term. What are the major issues that businesses are expressing right now? What are they talking about? Businesses are concerned first and foremost about getting the economy back on track. For them, that's the number one priority, getting the economy back on track. But they speak very significantly about the impact of crime and violence on their businesses and on the country in general. So this is the number one negative as far as they're concerned. The number one negative is crime, incidents of crime and violence on their operations. But amidst all of that, there is a greater determination amongst businesses to survive. They remain positive about the future, even if the data doesn't immediately reflect that. But when we talk to businesses and so on, and additional data that we pick up, they're saying they remain positive about the future. The majority, of course, confirm that they're now spending more to keep themselves in operation. They're spending more to function this year than they did last year. And they expect to be hit by more price increases, which will further impact their operations. So businesses are pretty global in their perspective. They have to be, they ought to be, they generally are. And what they're saying is that they expect that the impact of global prices will further slow them down, but they aren't there for the long haul. They are determined to dig out of the situation in the short to medium term. So they do plan to increase their expenditure, and I'm going to investment expenditure, and I'm going to tackle that. But similarly, as we did for the consumers, we looked at why people said the economy was, businesses said the economy was going to get better in the next 12 months. Why? What are the factors? And we're now again going to do the same thing that we did for consumers. We're going to highlight the top 5 reasons that businesses feel that conditions are going to get better. First note, 46% of the business sector feel that conditions are going to get better over the next 12 months. What are the top reasons? They're just being optimistic. The businesses are not different from the consumers. They don't have a solid enough reason. The number one reason is that, boy, I'm optimistic. I'm in there, I'm optimistic it's going to get better. Maybe it's a wish, but they're saying they're optimistic it's going to get better. What are the sort of concrete responses beyond that? They believe that government is putting in place things to improve the economy. So government policies have been put in place that will drive the improvement in the economy. This is part of the reason 46% of the businesses say conditions will get better. 3%, the third reason is that businesses say the economy is recovering. They're seeing signs around them that the economy is recovering, perhaps their businesses and others. But they're saying the economy is recovering, and this is another thing that is now driving their optimism that business will get better in the next 12 months. They speak specifically about the expectation that tourism sector will rebound. It's biggest money earner, and therefore they expect it to rebound, and they believe that this will drive the improvement in business conditions over the next 12 months. And 5, government ending the lockdown and the curfew. They're breathing a sigh of relief, and they believe that this is going to help to drive improvement in business. And these are the reasons why people are now talking in terms of business conditions getting better over the next 12 months. But note, 26% believe that business conditions will worsen. Again, what are their reasons? High prices, driving their costs up, and obviously driving the prices up to consumers, and overall having a deleterious effect on businesses. The impact of the war in Ukraine, disruption of the supply chain as a result of the war in Ukraine. Unstable foreign exchange. We've talked in terms not so much about an increase in the rate of exchange as the instability, which makes it difficult for them to plan long term. And this is what they're referring to here, the unstable foreign exchange. And 5thly, the economy, as far as some are concerned, is stagnant. This is not inconsistent with the view that the economy is getting better from the perspective of 46%, because on the other side, some businesses are saying the economy is stagnant, and this is what is driving the challenges that we're currently facing, and which is what is driving their view that business conditions will get worse, right? So we keep making the point that about 4 years ago, in concert with the chamber, we began to look at what are the areas of capital investment by industry that we can point to, because we often generated charts that said we're going to invest, and the questions came back at us, well, what are the sectors that are going to increase their capital investment? So from 2020, we began to plot this piece of information by industry type. And it's interesting to note, we just need to look at the three highest amongst the businesses for 2022 year to date. What do we have? Agriculture at 64%. We then have other services such as, the personal care business, new entrepreneurs, 60%. And we have construction, which has generally been high at 59%. So these are the three sectors, primary sectors, that indicate that they intend to increase investment, capital investment over the next few months. Another perspective of it is to look at the extreme right, because what is the trend, so to speak? And if we look at the trend, it says that the highest change has been amongst finance, insurance, real estate, and business services at 14 percentage points over 2021. Next would be wholesale and retail, 13.2% change 2022 over 21, and other services, 13%, 22 over 21. So we can see basically which sectors say they're going to invest, and we can see what changes are taking place in terms of the year-to-year situation, 21 to up-to-date 2022. This is a very important piece of information that we began to look at, because it's important for the banking sector, for example, to look at this and see, I should say, it's important for NCB to look at this and to see exactly where the movements are likely to take place in terms of capital investment. We look at a pretty important piece of information, and this is a very dramatic chart from our perspective, because if you look from 2010, when we started to plot these remittances received by Jamaican households, this is not the percentage of remittances, but the percentage of households that receive remittances. That number moved from 37% in 2010, but generally around the average of 35% up to 2020. But since 2021, that number has fallen dramatically. The last reported data year to date for 2022 has 24% of households claiming that they receive remittances. We know that the official data reports a slight reduction in the volume of remittances, but it's not reflected by the significant fall off in terms of the number of households that are receiving remittances. Very interesting. But note, 47% are now saying that we're receiving more than 3 years ago, 23% less, and 30% about the same. So the overall situation is that people are receiving more, but fewer people are receiving. And I think it's an important point to make. So we have a couple of, maybe two more charts to look at. We look at COVID impacts, still a factor with us. And the consumers on the one hand and businesses on the other were asked to talk in terms of what they see as government's priority in this COVID environment. So if we look to the extreme left, what are consumers saying they expect government to do under this environment? Number one, control the spread of COVID. They're saying they expect government to do that. Create more jobs and opportunities. Focus on the country's health and well-being. Getting the economy back on track. They have the same concern as businesses. And improving education and the school system. So these are the top 5 issues that consumers feel the government must address in this COVID environment. What about businesses? Getting the economy back on track. Controlling the spread. So there's not a lot of difference in the kinds of emphases that either consumers or businesses are placing. They may be a little bit, the order may be a little different, but they're kind of the same kinds of issues. Getting the economy back on track, number one for businesses. Controlling the spread of COVID. Managing inflation. Continue public education, and creating more jobs and opportunities. So these are the top 5 priorities. Consumers on the one hand, businesses on the other, as far as what they expect government to do to help to make a difference, a positive difference in their lives going forward, business lives, consumers' lives. That, ladies and gentlemen, represents the last chart. We've covered business and consumer confidence. Consumer confidence marginally down. business confidence more noticeably down, fair amount of pessimism amongst businesses and consumers. So we await the data from the third wave of fieldwork, which is currently underway, to help us see exactly whether this is a pattern that's likely to continue or what. So that represents my presentation, and we now welcome any questions, comments from panelists, from the audience.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Don. Very well laid out as usual.
Thank you.
Chock full of information there. Chock full of information. And I'm chomping at the bit with my own questions. And I'm just reminding the audience, if you have anything to ask Mr. Anderson or any of the panelists, you can type it in the Q&A. All right. I will get back to you, Don, because I do have some questions to ask you, but I will first want to just ask our panelists. Mrs. Lynn first, and then Philip. Business confidence, according to Don, is not as optimistic. Consumer confidence also not as optimistic. Honorable Thalia, you are a supplier of fast-moving consumer goods. You know, you can tell me at the end of any particular day how confident consumers are. And as a business person as well, do you share the sentiment that this poll shows? So from a business perspective, do you share the sentiment? And from a consumer perspective, are you seeing any fall off in confidence in your service based on any similarity with the results that Don's survey shows? But just before that, I've actually forgotten to mention, to ask Paul Media to just show those two short video clips from the business and consumers that we actually did the Vox Pop on. And then I'll get back to Madam Thalia and Philip.
Inflation has impacted our business in many ways. Inflation and the knock-on effect of high interest rates have impacted the cost of funds of us funding working capital and funding projects. So some projects that we thought of doing are not as viable as before. It also impacted our cost of goods sold and the cost of repair and maintenance equipment. Combined with the inflation that's taking place now, there's a global logistics challenge. So whereas before you could do just-in-time inventory and repairs and inventory equipment, now you have to be buying, items a year in advance, and you have to be forecasted. And at an increased cost, combined with all of that, because of inflation, you have to be spending a lot more on working capital and inventory. Capital expenditure, we've moved forward projects, and any projects that we've committed to, we've actually been more aggressive with it, because we know that today if it costs $1,000 to run, it might cost $1,200. On the recruitment and retaining staff, we've also had to adjust salaries to ensure that our staff are motivated and are compensated accordingly. We're a bit lucky in that the goods that we sell are pretty inelastic. So that what we have decided to do is to not pass on a lot of the cost increases to our customers, and have maintained margins. And we found that in this environment, the customers appreciate that we do our best to contain the prices to them, and they have rewarded us by continuing to patronize our businesses across the country. We're very grateful that we have a brand that people are attracted to. So every month or every quarter, our patronage has increased despite inflation and even despite the pandemic last year. What we have done strategically is to always try to increase the value proposition for our customers. So where we can, we try to maintain prices, our margins, and also try to give additional benefits to our customers. And I think the customers appreciate that even in this inflationary time, that they can rely on us for value. And I think that again, they have been rewarding us by increasing their patronage monthly and quarterly. So this time is pretty interesting. So you have inflation and at the same time having a logistics challenge. So what you find is that companies that actually have the inventory on hand have an advantage at this point in time. So my advice to anybody right now, it's going to be cheaper now to buy goods than later. And if you have the goods available for sale when people need it, you have an added benefit. So I would say if you're a small business or a small company, I'd say, try to forecast the demand for your goods, have the inventory available for sale, and because you're holding that inventory and that inventory is actually increasing in value because of inflation, I believe that's a good time, it's kind of worthwhile to have the inventory to be able to have it available for sale for when the customers need it.
Areas that affected with me by inflation is things that I used to buy, flour, sugar, rice. I used to buy them like half bag, quarter bag. Can't do that again.
Gas gone up and the goods are being more expensive.
And probably even the service fees at the banks have been going up, so it has affected the household in more than one way, yes.
My household are in problem because of certain food items. You understand, if you used to spend like $10,000 buy food, now it's step up to 30. You go to the supermarket, if you don't have $50,000, it makes you don't walk in the supermarket because $50,000 is not even a food dinner, so no doubt about that. We are in a very big problem.
Travel to work, definitely.
May I spend a whole heap on bus fare. Sometimes I'm just going like right down the road and I pay $150 and I don't really see the need.
Try and spend less if you can.
Where it's possible I can walk, I walk, and where I can get drive, I get drive.
Basically, what we have to use our hand and turn fashion now. We have to just plant a little banana, a little this and that. We just try to live a daily life.
You just have to try and be creative with spending money.
I'm a person that do mechanic work, I do music, I do a lot of stuff, so I have to get on those side most of the time to get my thing going.
The future reference would be spending less things on vanity, saving more, being more prioritizing what you want.
We need to unite ourselves and put ourselves together and motivate all the young guys, and because the young guys, they don't like farming, they don't like nothing more than sit home and wait for somebody to come and ask for something.
Wow. Thank you very much. That certainly tells the story. Those two excellent vox pops there. The man in the street and I would say a medium-sized business listed on the junior exchange, but I would still call it a medium-sized business in terms of their perspective. Okay. So Ambassador Thalia, any thoughts on the business and consumer confidence? Unmute. Remember to unmute, Thalia.
Sorry. Good morning, everybody. What I will say, from my point of view, I wouldn't say my confidence is down, but I would say it's very hard to strategize because everything is so unpredictable. Anya refers to wild cards. There are too many wild cards out there. So it's with price increases coming out at us every week, it is difficult. I am very optimistic, though, that Island Grill will always provide food for the people of Jamaica in a little niche market. We'll never be like the other competitors. But from that point of view, because I see the opportunity for us, I am optimistic. And I have really good partners. I know we talked about rising interest rates. I was lucky enough to lock in some interest rates before everything hit. I was also just in partnerships. When I think about like my landlords, all my landlords except one gave me a rent reduction. But you know, when you're shut down for 40% of the time, and that's why I'm saying when I went through FinSAC and I thought I'd been through the worst, but this was bad. There's something, Don said something about jobs, consumers feeling, or his survey showed that people felt that jobs were in short supply, and we're having such a problem finding people to fill our restaurants. And you can tell that all the QSRs are having that difficulty. And we take entry-level people. We used to ask that they have at least a heart certification or a certain amount of CXCs, but we're taking them and training them ourselves, although we really don't have the time to train them. But we started off with 900 employees pre-COVID, you know. We went right down to 600 and some, and it was difficult finding people. And we're finally up to, at the team level, maybe 90%, but we still need people. And what we find, though, that it is harder to find people who really want to work. And we offer good benefits. You know, we're people first. We have a commitment that we'll always pay a living wage. So while we can't keep up fully with inflation, we make sure they come to work and they have something to eat as they come in, if they come in on an early shift, just those kinds of benefits. We help them with, you know, we keep track of bus fares, say, and we also make it performance-based. So if you come to work on time and you're not sick and absent all the time, then you have levels of achievement that you get these little extra. I wouldn't say extra. It's not even merit-based. It's just from that point of view. If you come to work, you get paid, and we work hard to teach them life skills. You know, we have Colonel Rickman coming in to give us a little help with us, and he worked on the whole program, and we had Hope people come in, and we've been successful with that. And then the other question I would ask, Don, when you say businesses were slow to react, as I said, it's hard to react when you have, it's so unpredictable. And what was unpredictable for us were the lockdowns and the curfew hours. So, you know, you have produce, you have stuff that is going to spoil. And we had to react, and we had to change everything that we did. And my team, my people, they moved the goods. We ran specials to try and, you know, not have stuff spoil on us. We helped to feed the healthcare workers with NCB Foundation, just so we wouldn't have spoilage. So some of us did react. And Don, I pivoted till a dizzy. Right? I couldn't have done it without my team. My son and daughter-in-law came back to Jamaica at the right time, and then all my executives in there and the team. We survived, but it was hard. It wasn't easy, and it's still hard because we haven't. Inflation has hit us all, and Anya did a good job of saying exactly where it hit us. If you think of shipping costs going from $4,000 a container to up to $18,000 for a container, and then you can't get the container. Like if you go on social media and you see people cussing me because they can't get their French fries. I mean, we're known for French fries, but we pivoted, we put in the breadfruit tostones. You know, so yes, we're reacting. It seems slow to you because when you want your French fries, no, it doesn't seem as if we're moving fast enough. But from a business point of view too, we can't seem to get those transactions back up. Our revenues are way back up because of inflation. But obviously the consumers are suffering. They don't have the spending power anymore.
Okay.
So I'd love to hear what Philip is saying from his end.
Yes, just before Philip comes in, Don, I think in terms of the reaction, Celia, I think what Don was talking about is that the businesses tend to be a little more cautious in their optimism or in their forecasts, because they are more aware of other variables, whereas the consumers would say definitely if they get a 10% increase today or they get a new job today, instantly they would sort of make plans, have a more confident outlook. And the other thing I would mention, Don, I think you can authenticate this or not. Possibly one of the reasons, Talia, why you're having some challenges rehiring is that having been unfortunate to have to downsize a little bit, some of those persons have become entrepreneurs in their own right. So they no longer want to work for you, but they want to work for themselves. Would that be so, Don? Wasn't that one of the unmute, Don? Unmute, Don. You're muted.
Yeah, let me talk about points. You addressed the first one quite adequately. I think, you know, in the simplicity, there would be persons like yourself who reacted. But that's not so much the point that I'm making, that when you look at the overall business sector, they tend to be more cautious, and therefore, Andre made the point very clearly, more cautious, and therefore they don't have a knee-jerk reaction to changes, and they can't, because they're in there for the long haul. So that's the kind of caution that you see coming out in their outlook more than anything else, and not so much in terms of their action. All right. So, but we appreciate what you just said. Second point, Andre, was
Employment.
about the
Employment.
yeah. We've been finding that because of the challenges posed by COVID, a lot of individuals who lost jobs, and there were quite a few who lost jobs or were put on half pay, half week, what have you. They decided to try things, and they became entrepreneurs. And what we're finding is that the market is breeding a set of entrepreneurs, some more long-term, some short-term, some turnover. But this is a problem now that, and it's not only in Jamaica. I was talking to an economist out of the US the other day, and he's saying what's happening is that they can't find people to work. Strangely, you know, and to a large extent it's because people are now trying all sorts of different things and probably not as available to the marketplace as they would like to be, and don't tend to stay long in the environments that they get into.
Right. Amazon have hundreds of trucks parked.
Hey, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Philip Ramson, CEO, Chassis Ramson Limited. How do you see the business and consumer results here as it stacks up against your own experience now?
Well, Andre, thanks for having me. And Don, good to see you.
Same here, man.
My opinion is fairly consistent with Don's report. And I really could relate a lot to Anya's presentation in regards to our business, because unfortunately, we're less about sales and marketing, and we're more about supply chain management nowadays. So I find that when the pandemic first started, there was a boom in demand for products for the supermarkets. And so there was a big growth there. But as 2020 and 2021 came through, now we're finding major supply chain logistical issues going on. We saw major increases in freight rates, inconsistency in supply, and nowadays price increases on every quotation of packaging. If you're in manufacturing, price increases consistently on finished products. And so the biggest challenge that I think we're facing now, and the Jamaicans at large, is overall increase in consumer goods. And, you know, a lot of that is imported inflation, unfortunately. There's not a lot that the Jamaican, companies can do in terms of managing, those price increases. I think, we have seen a little glimmer of hope with freight rates out of Europe coming down a little. They were up as high as 10,000 euros for a 20-foot container out of Spain or out of Italy. And now they're down to 5,000 or just under. So we've seen a little bit of benefit there, but the inconsistency of supply, the unavailability of packaging, it does pose a big challenge. And now with the war, that's going to be something I think we're going to see continued for the remainder of this year, foreseeably, and possibly into 2023. I will say that as business owners and as business in Jamaica, we are getting better at managing in this environment. So I think from that standpoint, you will see some improvement. The economy itself, I think, is going to continue to be flat, but that we'll get better at surviving in it. So from a confidence standpoint, I'm very confident that businesses will continue to push through. I think that we have to get a little more creative in the way that we're managing our businesses. I certainly am looking to move more and more of my operations online in regards to being able to cut back some of my expenses with printing, cut back some of my expenses in reporting, and more of my flow online. So that is one thing that I'm definitely looking to do. But I would also agree with Taylor in that finding skilled labor is a challenge. And I know that a lot of people had to find alternative work when the pandemic hit, but I also think certain industries have grown. Tourism right now is very, very strong in terms of occupancies in the hotels. The demand for labor is there, and they're struggling to get through. The call center business has grown rapidly, and that is taking up a lot of labor. But it is definitely a challenge. And I think people are also demanding more. I think cost of living has gone up substantially, and that people are not willing to work for what they were working for pre-pandemic. And as business owners, I think that we have to adjust our packages to reflect the needs of the employee. I mean, as simple as this, just to get to and from work, provide lunch for the day, that kind of thing is things that we have to look into to assist in the staffing, because that is a challenge, and I think that is something that we're going to struggle with for the foreseeable future.
Okay, thank you. I think one of the things that I saw, consumers expect prices to increase. Consumers continue to expect prices to increase. What can you do to sort of help to protect us in that regard? I mean, the FESCO, the executive from FESCO mentioned forward purchasing, but of course that takes cash flow.
Sure.
What can you do to protect the consumer from, or to lessen the shock to the consumers, even though we expect the prices to increase?
Sure. Well, if you can afford to, you need to try and keep more inventory on hand. That helps to stabilize the pricing a little bit. Forward or forecasting your buying of foreign exchange, absolutely. I think we've been fortunate this last quarter that the dollar actually revalued. So those who are able to buy some US and some Euro to be able to take you through the third quarter would benefit from that. And in terms of being able to provide, I would say, more economical options from a food standpoint, I'm looking at reducing the size of packaging or reducing the offerings, so that maybe people who can't afford a $200 box of Fosco oats is going to be able to get $100 bag of oats that they can stretch further. So in that standpoint, I think you just have to look at your offerings and keep a wider mix of goods.
Right. Celia, same question. What can you do further to protect your consumers from the shocks that are on you, and at the same time still try and manage your margins? You're muted.
Sorry, that one is hard, mainly because, like, normally we would keep maybe 1 or 2 months supply of imported goods like the fries. Now we have to keep 4 months supply, but that involves cold storage charges. So you might save at one end, but we do it mainly because of the supply chain issues, right? We don't want to run out of products. So we've been trying hard to manage. What is good is because our partners are long-standing partners. We've been managed to negotiate with them and hold their prices, especially because they understand that we have foreign exchange issues sometimes where, the dollar fluctuates. So it's hard to predict, but we're always trying to see if we could go local with a lot more products, that would really help us. Like the breadfruit tostones, it's not from Jamaica, but at least it's from the region, which makes it's a little better than South America even then. So this is what we're trying to do to see if we can cut down on freight charges in some ways, or just find better quality. I'm not going to sacrifice quality for a less expensive product. But I can't tell you what else we could do. I mean, we get price increases every week.
Right. certainly product diversification and product modification is one thing which you have done. Why the breadfruit not coming from here? Simply because of supply again, not enough consistent supply.
We have, and I know, you know, Grace Kennedy is looking to see if they can move towards producing some of these products. We're working on a sweet potato fry with them. But like it's same thing with the green plantain. It comes from Costa Rica, Rep, those countries, and producers is doing a good job of bringing them in. And maybe I know long term, a lot of importers are looking to manufacturing, but it's a process.
Okay.
Yeah, and Andre, if I could just add, I think there is a target of 25% by 2025 in terms of local production of products. I think where we need to look at is how to try and make it more efficient in terms of getting to that. Because right now, if you look in the market, some of our local production is more expensive than imported items.
Right, this has always been the challenge.
Yeah, it's been the challenge. I think we need to be able to, from a governmental standpoint, look at supporting the local manufacturers or local producers to get them more efficient, to be more competitive.
Right. I have some questions for you, Don, but before that, Sandra in the chat asked a question to Mrs. Lynn, which is what is the possibility about purchasing potatoes from local farmers rather than import for fries? But I think Philip pretty much just answered that, but go ahead, Zelia.
Well, one of the things is that from what I understand, as far back as when Tony Myers from KFC was alive, we looked at setting up a factory to produce French fries. And one of the big issue, he said, was growing the right type of potato for the fries. And it was also very capital intensive. Now I know McCain's, who supplies us, they're having issues even getting the raw material, the potatoes itself. So it's not as if we would not look at it. And that's why we're looking at sweet potato fries. But you know, there are also different varieties of sweet potato. Everything is a little more complex than it seems. It seems easy to say, do your own fries. And we tried it, you know, we had a little fry cutter and everything, but for volume, when you come to economies of scale, it's not that easy to work out.
Right. Thank you very much. Don, there's a question in the chat concerning going back to remittances. We certainly have to come back to you know, where our consumers get income from. It says, were there insights from remittance recipients on the reason for the volume declines? Possibly if the senders would have stated why it is that less is coming. I think we know the answer, but you know, for the clarity and to answer the question in the chat. Is there any insight as to what caused the decline in remittances coming in?
Fortunately, we don't have a subsequent question which asks persons why. I mean, we wouldn't have anticipated that. We were just asking persons, did you receive remittances in the last quarter? And we got a yes, no answer, okay? The questionnaire, of course, is extremely long from that perspective. It's all the issues that we cover in one instrument. So it would have been difficult to have added a qualitative evaluation as to, we would have had to anticipate this kind of fall off to ask them, well, why? And we didn't, right? So we don't have an answer to that from the survey. But what we don't, but what we have found from previous investigations is that obviously the other market, the main markets that contribute to remittances obviously are the US, UK, and so on. And it's important to note that in these economies, they're experiencing their own challenges, you know, and as a result, we find that few and few people are able to actually send remittances and by extension receive remittances in Jamaica. I think that's really one of the factors too, that the pressure is on in the markets from which remittances generally come.
Right. There's another question which I'm not sure how accurate it is. It says, I noticed crime not featured in the low confidence reading, though crime features continuously in all major news. Why is this so? He's saying here that crime is not featured in the low as a reason for the low confidence. Is that true? I don't remember that.
No, it's not quite accurate. As a matter of fact, when you ask businesses what are some of the factors that inhibit greater productivity, crime is the most significant factor mentioned. It is. So this is a big issue. It has been the big issue for quite some time.
Right.
Big issue.
Right.
Right.
So I'll
We don't
put
want to
that
get
question-
into. Sorry,
No,
we don't
not
want to get
into
into
too much.
No. Right.
But,
Can't get
yeah.
into that too much.
But we have two business persons here. I mean, you have a lot of overheads increasing. In this time, have you found it necessary to increase spend on security as well? Thalia, you first.
I think we always had that in place too. In other words, we've always used every type of security, like we have the panic buttons, we have cameras, we have everything. So it's not as if it's an added expense at this point. What cost us a lot were the COVID protocols. That was a big business expense as well. But crime prevent, where it costs us is not in the increasing the cost to putting in security measures, except for maybe additional lighting. But it is more like at night where we are concerned about, we probably don't stay open as late at Twin Gates because we're concerned about the safety of our staff. There are certain things that people want to know why you don't have curbside pickup. Not until I can pay online, the customers can pay online. I can't expose my staff to going outside and taking cash, those kinds of things. So it's like an opportunity cost more than anything else, Andre. But as I said, we already had security factored in there big time.
Okay, Philip. Thank you, Philip.
Yeah, crime is a major concern. I think that especially in our industry, we're dealing with a lot of goods on the road, and a lot of maybe cash that needs to be collected. So it is a concern. I agree with Thalia. I have not had to adjust any of our protocols in place of that. But what I do look at is that the people that are in the positions, I have to make sure that I have the right persons. So I am considering making changes and adjustments to the procedures in terms of access to goods or to cash and reflect. But it is a major concern.
Okay.
I should add, sorry, Andre, that we do have now a full-time risk and safety officer, manager, who pays attention for us, because staff safety is always the first thing. We don't want to expose our staff. And going home at night, we have made sure that the drivers are checked out properly, that we're careful going into neighborhoods that are considered unsafe. Those kinds of things he pays attention to. But like Philip, I don't think we've adjusted costs except for maybe an extra guard here or there where we think it's necessary.
Okay, thank you very much. The survey shows businesses, the main three concerns of businesses is the consistency of the economy, crime and violence, and overhead costs. Would you share that as your top three as well? Either one of you?
Go, Philip.
Well,
I think.
Number one concern is pricing. I'm in fast-moving consumer goods. People are very concerned with the price of how much they have to pay for their food. Is one. Number two for me is employment. I'm concerned on finding skilled employment that I can rely on. And then three really is something that is ongoing, is always to become more efficient, because pricing in not just my consumer goods, but pricing in conducting business. I mean, I've moved almost completely onto solar. We just did a major solar project, and my entire warehouse's roof is full with solar panels, because we have to become more efficient, because it's just part of where we are in the economy right now.
All right. Yes, Thalia, the three things that you'd have to really address to maintain the viability of your business long term.
Like Philip, I would say the pricing, because you see, I mean, I can tell you, anything imported, like rice has gone up 93%.
Wow.
Shortening has gone up 97%. Boxes, imported boxes, because we use environmentally friendly boxes. You know, we're careful about even the coating in the boxes. That's gone up 98%. So things like that, it's just hard, and you get these increases, and not only that, the delays. It's just hard to predict those kind of supply issues. The employment, I'm still questioning Don about the 15.6% who think that jobs are in short supply, because we are having difficulty. And no, we're not. People would want to work in a hotel rather than work in a fast food restaurant, right? But we want to be the best first job, and we try to make sure that we train properly so that they stay. That's our big thing, that we're trying to build for future. And then efficiency is the other thing that we're concentrating on. It's just hard to be efficient when you're handling food at that level, to make sure the wastage, those kinds of things. But that's more internal than anything else. And then being able to really change those prices without making it unaffordable to our consumers.
To keep your customers happy.
Yes, yes. Are you happy, Andre? Are you happy?
Of course.
And, I have to ask Anya. Anya says that the food and energy, she's saying that it's easing a little, and I don't see it easing. So anyway, I need to see where her research shows that.
The breadfruit was a good pivot, Celia. But we have time for two more just before we wrap up, and I thank you all. Trevor Fern has a question for you, Don. And again, remittances keep coming up. He's asking for some clarity as it relates to, as he saw the data, families were receiving more, but the number of families that are receiving remittances are less. Is that correct?
It is.
It is.
So there's a low incidence of receipt by families in Jamaica, but not everybody, but about 47% said they were receiving more.
Right.
Some were receiving less. And the point I made from that is that it should have been reflected in a slightly lower official level of remittances coming in. But fewer families are receiving, but 47% of those families are receiving more. That's correct.
Excellent. All right. As we wrap up now, final question for the panelists. Any small and medium-sized entity now in facing the same challenges that you have, what would be your advice to them in terms of making it through this situation to maintain viability and increase efficiency? How would you? I mean, we're here to share information, but we also want to provide guidance as well as experienced business persons. A small, medium-sized business, or a micro business for that matter, what would you recommend, Philip, first, to small and medium persons listening on as to what worked for you and what you'd suggest that they would do to help them to get through this difficult period?
Well, Andre, I think being able to manage your supply chain management in terms of keeping more inventory on hand. I know that's difficult because that affects your cash flow, but the more that you can keep on hand is the more you can maintain your pricing. And sometimes just having stock is going to allow you to get the sale over the person who doesn't have any inventory on that. So I think that's an idea. And then also, and I think even if you're a small and medium business, is looking at your capital expenditure in terms of trying to do whatever next project you want to do, to try and do that now versus down the road, because pricing is going to continue to rise. So your budget for what is planned is based on prices today. So if you can afford to, look on that before and not delay.
Thank you very much. Last word goes to Celia.
Yeah, I agree with Philip. Do it now. Find a friendly banker, negotiate your rates, and treat your people right. Once you treat your people right and build that loyalty, and you have that team behind you, it helps. Share and be transparent with them. They understand, and be empathetic to their needs as well. So, can I ask that we get a copy of the presentations, Andre?
Yes. Our team is online, And
Yes.
they will ensure that, and it will also be on YouTube, on the NCB's YouTube channel.
Okay, because Anya has to tell me why she's seeing the easing of food and energy
Right.
costs. And I have to look
She said-
closely at Don's presentation again to see where I missed it.
Right. Well, since you got there, I'll give Anya the last word then, as it relates to two things: how kind you're going to be as an investment banker to your customers now in need of that kind of support. One, and two, answer to Thalia's question quickly. Thank you.
Okay, so the easing of energy price, the question is whether it's been passed on to you, right? Certainly on the international market and the benchmark prices that they use, and it's not as significant. Because remember, inflation is a rate, right? And if you calculate point to point, maybe it increased by, say, 20% or 10% last, let's look at June, but this June, the pace of increase might be 2. So when you roll that off, you end up with a slower pace of increase in terms of prices. But generally, oil prices are lower. The question is, are companies here using that opportunity, to take back some margin? Because the fall off in like Brent crude that we've seen from over $115, $120 to maybe just over 100. And then it fell to 90 something dollars. We didn't see that. It's still $200 and odd per liter at the pumps, right? So that may be why it's not translating, but it may take some time to translate to us. In terms of what we're doing in terms of helping businesses. So there is not much you can do in terms of market rates. The market rates are what they are, and investors are going to demand a premium. But what we can do is in terms of the type of financing that's available to you. So, through our various investment vehicle structures, maybe you can get the type of financing that gives you, allows you to just pay interest, or there's a delay in the interest payment until a future date. And then equity financing, we find that more companies, especially in the SME space, are now more open to equity financing. So that is always an option. You do, for the companies that do take on equity financing, yes, you give up some of your company, but if you go the option of listing, what we found, and the market attests to it, is that there is greater value to be realized in terms of the increase in valuation that you get when you list. So there is that option available as well. So we're looking at more creative financing, the kind that will allow you breathing space, certainly in terms of debt servicing. And we are trying to give you the best rates as the market would allow, but also equity financing too is an option.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This has been a constant flow of positive information and guidance to our businesses, small businesses, and our consumers and our public generally. And I thank you all very much. Thank you to our sponsors, NCB Capital Markets, National Commercial Bank. Thank you, Anya, VP Strategy Research, Innovation and Projects, for your presentation. Thank you also to Dane Nicholson, Manager of Special Investigation in the NCB Fraud Protection Unit, to remind us about those things that we need to be doing to protect our valuable assets and our cash in particular. Mr. Anderson, right on point as usual. I like the new graphics on your presentation, makes it very easy to follow, and I'm sure that our audience appreciates that as well. And a big thank you to our panelists, our very experienced panelists, who have provided us with insight, with guidance and advice as to how we can continue to maneuver through. To Honorable Thalia Lynn, founder, CEO, Island Grill, and of course, Philip Ramson, Managing Director, Chassis Ramson Limited, and Vice President of the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce. Ladies and gentlemen, online, YouTube, and on Facebook, thank you all very much for joining us. And I encourage you, one other thing I would say is that good governance will get you through this as well. So don't make a unilateral strategic decision on your business, because it can get you into trouble. So, get some good guidance before you make those decisions, and that can help you, based on the experience of the people here and others in the industry to guide yourselves through these difficult times. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone participating, and enjoy the rest of your day. Have a good day.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you,
Bye.
Andre.
Thank you very much.
for joining us.